The Tupac Shakur trial is underway, and in this segment, we're focusing on the prosecution's opening statement against Duane Keefe D. Davis. During an opening statement, prosecutors are not presenting proven facts. They are explaining to the jury what they believe the evidence will show during the trial. In this portion of the case, prosecutors are laying out their theory of what happened, the events they believe led up to Tupac Shakur, and what they allege was the motive behind it. They are also explaining the role they believe Keefe D played and how they say the events surrounding the confrontation in Las Vegas ultimately led to the shooting. Remember, these are allegations being presented by the prosecution. Keefe D has pleaded not guilty, and the defense will have the opportunity to challenge the prosecution's evidence, witnesses, and version of events. We're going to let you hear part of the opening statement, and then we'll come back and break down what was said and why it could be important as this trial moves forward. This is second-to-none media coverage of the Tupac Shakur trial.
Mr. Wall, are you ready to give your opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur came to Las Vegas to attend a Mike Tyson fight. After the fight, Tupac, along with Suge Knight, Trayvon Lane, and other people that were with that group, ran into a person named Orlando Anderson. And Orlando Anderson is the defendant's nephew. And when they encountered Orlando Anderson sitting by himself, they attacked him. And that attack was captured on video. Then, a few hours later, Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight drive down Flamingo Road to Club 662, where Tupac is scheduled to perform in a concert. Then 2.5 hours later, after Tupac and Suge engaged in the beating of Orlando Anderson, they are gunned down. Tupac is gunned down in a drive-by shooting from a white Cadillac in an act of revenge. During those 2.5 hours, you will learn that the defendant was escalating and planning the retribution for the beating of his beloved nephew. Now, let's be clear. Duane Davis did not pull the trigger. But what he did do was plan the retaliation for the beating of his nephew. You will learn that Duane Davis got the gun. You will learn that he got into a white Cadillac. You will learn when the opportunity presented itself for retribution, Duane Davis made sure that the shooters were armed and ready to execute their revenge. And remarkably, you will learn that from Duane Davis himself. But to understand what happened on September 7th, 1996, on the streets of Las Vegas, we need to go about 275 miles west to the city of Compton, California. What you will learn is that Compton is about 10 square miles. But in the mid-1990s, those 10 square miles were occupied by over 30 gangs claiming its territory. And important to this case, there are two gangs, Mob Piru and the Southside Compton groups. Let's talk a little bit about the Mob Piru. The Mob Piru is a group that associated with the color red. And you'll hear that Suge Knight, the person who was driving Tupac Shakur that night, grew up in the neighborhood of Mob Piru. But by the mid-1990s, he had become a very successful CEO of the record label Death Row Records. But despite, or maybe because where he came from, you'll hear that Suge Knight continued to Mob Piru gang members as part of death row. They would act as unofficial security, and other times they would engage in, let's call them other acts, on behalf of Suge Knight. But death row in the mid-1990s was one of the most successful record labels around. They had artists such as Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and of course, Tupac Shakur. And in 1996, Tupac Shakur was maybe the largest and biggest sold, released All Eyes on Me, a double album that was met with huge success. Additionally, Tupac Shakur was a movie star, having appeared in a number of movies in critically acclaimed roles. He has at times been referred to as an icon. But for the purposes of this case, what you need to know is that Tupac Shakur was not a gangster. He was a hip-hop artist associated with the Mob Piru. Now, the other gang that's important to know here is the Southside Compton Crips. And when it comes to Southside, Duane Keefe D. Davis was the leader of the Burris Street faction of the Southside Compton Crips. And while Suge Knight rose to prominence in his neighborhood due to the money that he was bringing in through the music industry, Duane Davis rose to prominence in his neighborhood because he was a very successful, large-scale drug trafficker. And you will learn that that is how one moves up in the world of gangs, by bringing in money to the neighborhood. The other thing you'll learn is that Orlando Baby Lane Anderson was his nephew, and also a highly respected member of the Southside Compton Crips. Now, as part of this case, you're going to hear another name, Eric Zip Martin. Now, Eric Zip Martin is not a member of the Southside Compton Crips. In fact, he's based out of New York. He's involved in the drug trade and knows Duane Davis as a result of both their involvements in the drug trade. Duane Davis from the West Coast, Eric Zip Martin from the East Coast. And one of the connections that Duane Davis gets through his association with Zip Martin is with Sean Puffy Combs, who was then the CEO of Bad Boy Entertainment. Sean Combs wanted some security when he came out to the West Coast. He was worried about Mob Piru. He was worried about the members of Death Row Records. And so Duane Keefe D. Davis agreed to be around to act as unofficial security for Sean Combs and his artists when they came out west, in order specifically to ensure there are no problems with Mob Piru and Death Row Records. And this took a rivalry between Mob Piru and Southside Compton Crips and escalated it. And those tensions boiled over in the Lakewood Mall in the summer of 1996. There, you'll hear that Trayvon Lane, a member of the Mob Piru associated with Death Row Records, was there with other members of Mob Piru in order to do some shopping. Lakewood Mall was a mall nearby Compton. You'll also hear that Baby Lane Anderson, Orlando Anderson, the defendant's nephew, was there. Now, Trayvon Lane that day was wearing a chain with a Death Row medallion. And there was a fight that occurs between the Mob Piru group and the Southside Compton Crips. And at one point, that chain is pulled off Trayvon Lane's neck. Now, what happened to that chain is an issue of much dispute. Not everybody agrees with it. But the act of disrespect of pulling the Death Row chain and the brawl that occurs further escalates this heated rivalry. And what you'll learn is that these two men, Trayvon Lane and Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, they encounter each other again, this time in Las Vegas. So that brings us back up to September 7th, 1996, here in Las Vegas. Again, Mike Tyson is fighting Bruce Sullivan. He disposes of him in less than in a round. Doesn't take a full round. And then after the fight, Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, and the people that are here with, they leave. And among his group is Trayvon Lane. And that is why this fight occurs. Trayvon Lane and the death row group sees Orlando Anderson standing by himself, and they decide to attack him in retribution for what happened at the Lakewood Mall. You'll see Orlando Anderson's on the bottom of that group. You see security coming, trying to break this up. And then you'll see Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, Trayvon Lane, and that group exit the MGM Grand. Now, Orlando Anderson was by himself because when Duane Davis purchased the tickets for the Bruce Seldon fight, he got them through a scalper. So everybody that came with Duane Davis were seated separately throughout the fight. And so Orlando Anderson was, at that time, by himself. You'll see that Mr. Shakur, Mr. Knight, and his group leave the MGM Grand. And you'll see that Orlando Anderson, after being held by security, is questioned for a bit, asked if he wants to press charges. He decides he doesn't want to participate in any type of prosecution and that he doesn't need medical attention. Duane Davis hears about this beating. And what you will hear is that in his world, there is no question that a response is required. And you will hear from Duane Davis what happens next. Because what happened over the next 2.5 hours is something Duane Davis would later describe himself in a secret 2008 interview from his attorney's office with the federal task force. And we'll talk about that interview and the circumstances surrounding that later. But we'll hear about what the next 2.5 hours was. So, what we learn is that Duane Davis is upset about the beating of his nephew. And frankly, that's not an unusual response. What's unusual is the next steps Duane Davis takes. Unusual for the normal person, maybe not unusual for in gang culture. Duane Davis decides he is going to organize a retaliation, that this beating cannot go unanswered. Then he runs into a person named Zip Martin. Remember the Zip Martin that was a connection with Bad Boy Entertainment from New York? And Zip Martin tells him that he has a gun and that he can come help him out.
Hey, where do you go to? What do you tell Zip right now? You tell Zip, hey, we're going to go handle this shit or whatever?
Yeah, like, y'all want us to come? Like, you know what I'm going to do? They was they going to get 662 Club.
Who's saying that?
Everybody.
Everybody out there?
Yeah.
You don't think that man is wrong? He could have reacted in a better way, I guess. I'm talking. Vlad is his fucking biggest fan. He admitted that man is wrong, man. He's wrong, man. But that was only done out of loyalty, man. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. He never jumped, my nephew didn't jump on him. He jumped on my nephew. A kid, man. My nephew was a fucking kid. He was a grown-ass man, so, you know what I'm saying? He was a fucking kid, dude. That's why he had on the channel. He's a fucking kid, dude. You know what I'm saying?
That is the visceral anger that Duane Davis had for Tupac Shakur. It didn't, in 2.5 hours, he took care of what he thought was the proper response. And 28 years later, he still is angry about what Tupac did.
That was part of the prosecution's opening statement in the Tupac Shakur murder trial. Remember, an opening statement is not evidence. It is the prosecution explaining what they believe the evidence will show. Duane Keefe D. Davis has pleaded not guilty, and the defense will have its opportunity to challenge these allegations throughout the trial. We'll continue following the testimony, the evidence, and both sides of this case as it unfolds. Stay with Second to None Media for continued coverage of the Tupac Shakur trial.